She was born into a life that seemed simple at first. Her father had worked hard all his life, doing small jobs and giving his best to ensure she had a home, clothes, and food. But when she was very young, life changed in a way she could never have imagined. Her father fell sick and passed away, leaving her in the hands of her stepmother. At first, she thought her stepmother would care for her, but she soon realized that this was not the case. The stepmother had never truly liked her, and now that the father was gone, the girl was nothing more than an inconvenience in the household. The house she grew up in felt bigger than it was, not because of space, but because of the emptiness she felt. The rooms were quiet, except for the sound of the stepmother's harsh words, and the house smelled faintly of cleaning agents because she spent most of her childhood scrubbing floors, washing dishes, and keeping the place spotless. Every day, she woke up early, made breakfast, cleaned the house, and sometimes helped the stepmother with her small tasks. She had very little time for herself, no friends to play with, and hardly anyone to talk to about her worries. Even when she tried to speak, her stepmother would often tell her she was useless or clumsy. It hurt, but she learned to stay silent, to do her work quietly, to avoid drawing attention to herself. School was a small relief. She loved learning, and her mind was curious. But she could not enjoy it fully because she knew the moment she came home, more chores awaited. Sometimes she wished she could be someone else, live somewhere far away, or have a mother who loved her for who she was. She never expressed these thoughts out loud because she knew it would only anger the stepmother as she grew older. The stepmother began to control more aspects of her life. She was not allowed to make friends, not allowed to go out freely, and not allowed to dream of her own future. The stepmother would often talk about the girl's future in a harsh tone, deciding everything for her. One day, the stepmother mentioned a man who was looking for a wife. He was different, she said. Disabled, needing care, someone simple and obedient. The stepmother's voice was cold, but excited. She explained that this would solve many problems for her. The girl did not understand at first. When she asked questions, she was met with anger and scolding. It became clear that this marriage was not her choice. The days leading up to the wedding were some of the hardest she had ever experienced. She felt trapped, powerless, and alone. She tried to imagine a life with this man who she had never met, and it terrified her. All she had been told was that he was disabled, that he would not be able to work, and that she would have to take care of him. She felt the weight of the stepmother's words like chains around her heart. She thought her life was ending before it had really begun. She wanted to run away, to hide, to disappear, but there was nowhere she could go. The stepmother had ensured she had no money, no friends, and no place to seek help. The wedding day arrived quietly. There were no grand celebrations, just a small gathering of relatives and neighbors. Some people pitied her. Others whispered about the groom's condition. She walked down a small aisle, feeling the weight of every eye on her. Her heart pounded, but she did not cry. She felt numb. The groom sat there, calm, waiting. He looked ordinary. Nothing that gave away who he really was, or any hint of what kind of person he might be. All she could see was the man she was being forced to live with for the rest of her life. The ceremony was over quickly. She was taken to a small, quiet home where she would now live with him. Everything felt strange. She was used to the loud, chaotic house of her childhood, the constant noise of people, and now everything was quiet. The man did not speak much. He did not ask questions, and he did not demand attention. For a moment, she thought maybe it would be easier than she expected. But the fear never left her. She felt like a bird trapped in a cage, unable to fly, unable to live freely. Days turned into weeks. She learned to adapt to the new home, learning its routines, cleaning, cooking, and taking care of the man as expected. But slowly, she noticed small things. He did not treat her badly. He never raised his voice, never criticized her work. Instead, he was polite, patient, and respectful. Sometimes he would smile at her, quietly, and it felt like a small beam of light in the dark tunnel of her life. She'd never received such kindness before. It confused her. How could someone who was supposed to be dependent, someone she was told to pity, treat her with so much respect? At night, When the house was silent, she would think about her life. She would stare at the ceiling, wondering why she had been given such hardship. She hated her stepmother for taking away her choices. She hated herself for being powerless. And she feared the future, not knowing what it would bring. But the tiny moments of kindness from the man gave her a strange feeling of hope, a feeling she had long forgotten existed. It was small, fragile, but it was there. She also started to notice that the man's home was different than it seemed. The furniture was simple, but well maintained. The bills were always paid on time. Sometimes visitors would arrive speaking to him with respect and leaving quickly. She began to feel curious, wondering who he really was, why people treated him with such respect, and what his life had been before their marriage. But every time she tried to ask, he would smile gently and change the subject. She realized he had secrets she was not yet ready to understand. Even with the fear and the confusion, she began to adapt. She learned to cook better, to clean more efficiently, to anticipate his needs before he asked. She found a strange satisfaction in being useful, in being needed. But she never let herself hope too much. She thought life had punished her enough, and she believed she must endure silently. She had learned long ago that speaking up or wishing for more often led to disappointment. The girl slowly started to observe him more closely. She noticed how he had treated people outside their home, how his words, though few, carried weight, and how his actions, though small, were deliberate and thoughtful. He was not just a man in a wheelchair. He was careful, intelligent, and kind. She could not understand it fully, but it made her respect him quietly. She did not know it yet, but this respect was the first step toward understanding the life she had been thrown into, and the person she would eventually see beyond the mask of disability. Life remained quiet but not easy. Every day brought chores, small conversations, and a growing sense of curiosity about the man she had been forced to marry. She often wondered if life could ever bring her happiness, or if she was destined to endure silently forever. The stepmother's shadow loomed over her in memory, but here, in this quiet home, she found small sparks of something she had not felt in years: peace, respect, and the possibility that her life might not be over after all. Even in her darkest moments, she clung to those small signs of kindness, as if they were lifelines thrown to her in a stormy sea. And little did she know, her life was about to take a turn so extraordinary that everything she had suffered, everything she had endured, would begin to make sense in ways she could never have imagined. Life in the new home settled into a quiet rhythm. She woke up early each day to prepare breakfast and organize the house. The man she had married was always calm and composed. Although he needed some assistance for daily tasks, he never complained or demanded more than necessary. The girl often felt frustrated by the monotony and the lack of freedom, but slowly she began to understand the rhythm of the house and how things worked. She learned to anticipate his needs without being told, to make small gestures that made their days smoother. And in return, he would smile occasionally or thank her softly. These small moments, though simple, started to feel like glimpses of warmth in her otherwise challenging life. As the days passed, the girl noticed that people outside the house treated her husband with respect. Neighbors, delivery men, and visitors seemed to approach him carefully, listening to his words even when they were quiet or brief. She did not understand it at first. How could a man who appeared so ordinary be treated with such regard? She tried to ask him once, gently, but he only smiled and said, "Some things are better left unknown for now." She respected his words, but the curiosity inside her grew stronger. The neighbors and relatives sometimes expressed pity or concern, thinking she must be struggling to take care of a disabled husband. They could not see the quiet dignity in the way he handled himself, or the intelligence in his manner. She began to feel protective of him, a strange shift from the fear and resentment she had first felt. Something about his presence demanded respect, and gradually, she started to admire his patience and thoughtfulness. One day, while cleaning, she noticed a small stack of letters that had arrived earlier. They were neatly arranged, addressed to her husband. She was tempted to peek, but she remembered his gentle warning and resisted. Yet, the mere fact that he received letters with no one else allowed to read them stirred a sense of mystery. She wondered who would write to him and what he had been doing before their marriage. She did not know yet that these letters were a glimpse into a life that was far more extraordinary than she could imagine. Despite her growing curiosity, life was not easy. The chores were endless, and the loneliness sometimes weighed heavily on her. In her old life, she had been used to some company, even if it was limited. Here she had no one to talk to about her fears or dreams. But her husband's quiet understanding slowly offered her a kind of companionship she had never experienced before. When she spoke about small things, he listened attentively. When she hesitated, he did not push. But his calm presence was comforting. She also began to notice small habits that seemed unusual. He had an incredible memory, remembering tiny details about people, events, and conversations. He often seemed to know what to say in any situation to make someone feel heard and respected. Sometimes, she would catch him reading books or writing in a notebook, his eyes sharp and focused. These glimpses puzzled her. How could a man who seemed dependent appear so independent in thought and action? One afternoon, she tried to cook a special meal, something she had learned from a neighbor before marriage. She wanted to surprise him, to see if she could bring a smile to his face. He noticed immediately and gently complimented her efforts. The sincerity in his voice, the quiet appreciation, made her heart lift in a way she had not felt in years. For the first time, she thought that perhaps life could offer more than just survival and chores. It could offer moments of happiness. However small, her stepmother's cruel words still echoed in her mind sometimes. But she began to notice that the man she lived with treated her with dignity, not like a servant or a burden. He never reminded her of her lowly status, never criticized her past, and never compared her to anyone else. This was strange and unfamiliar. Slowly, she began to let go of the constant fear and resentment she carried. She realized that she could begin to trust someone. Even after everything she had endured, one evening, there was a knock on the door. A visitor had arrived, someone she did not recognize. The man greeted the visitor calmly, and they spoke briefly. The visitor's manner was respectful, almost deferential, and he left after some time. She asked her husband quietly who the person was, but he only smiled and said, "People from the past sometimes come to see the present." She could not understand the meaning, but she felt a flicker of pride and curiosity at the way he commanded, respect without raising his voice or making demands. Over time, she began to notice small signs of generosity in him. He would occasionally leave small gifts for her, items she had never expected or requested. They were thoughtful, not extravagant, but they showed he cared. Each gift felt like a quiet message. "I see you, I respect you, and I appreciate you." The girl was not used to being appreciated, and these gestures slowly began to heal the invisible scars of her past. She also started to explore her own interests. Though chores remained, she took time to read, to think, and to dream quietly about what her life could be. She realized that even in a life she thought was ruined, she could find moments of joy and self-discovery. She began to write in a small journal, recording her thoughts, her hopes, and the small acts of kindness she witnessed every day. The journal became a silent companion, a place where she could express feelings she could not share with anyone else. One day, she noticed something unusual in the house. There was a small drawer she had never opened before. Curiosity got the better of her, and she gently pulled it open. Inside, she found documents, photographs, and awards that belonged to her husband. They told a story she had never imagined, a story of achievement, intelligence, and a life far larger than she had ever known. She was shocked, unsure how to feel. He was more than just a quiet man with a disability. He had a history, a presence, and accomplishments that seemed almost unbelievable. Despite her shock, she respected his privacy and closed the drawer. She realized that life had layers, and people were often more than what they appeared to be. The man she had been forced to marry was kind, intelligent, quietly commanding respect in ways she could not yet understand. Slowly, she began to see him not as a burden or a stranger, but as someone she could learn from, someone who could teach her about patience, dignity, and the quiet strength that comes from within. Months passed, and she became more comfortable in her new life. She still remembered her stepmother's cruelty, the endless chores, and the fear she had felt on the wedding day. But those feelings were no longer the center of her world. Instead, she focused on the small acts of kindness, the quiet wisdom of her husband, and the tiny moments of peace and happiness she had discovered. She realized that life, even when it seemed cruel and unfair, could still offer hope and change. She began to see the world around her in a different light. The neighbors who once pitied her now spoke to her with respect, noticing the calm, composed way she carried herself. The visitors who once seemed mysterious became part of the quiet rhythm of her life. Even the small moments, like a smile from her husband, a fresh meal, or a quiet afternoon, became treasures she cherished deeply. In this second part of her journey, she discovered that life was not just about enduring hardship. It was about noticing the kindness around her, learning from the people she met, and finding strength in unexpected places. She began to understand that her forced marriage, while painful at first, had given her the chance to see a world she had never imagined, a world of respect, patience, and quiet love. And little did she know, this was only the beginning of a story that would soon reveal truths far beyond what she could ever dream. Life continued in its quiet rhythm. But the girl's curiosity about her husband grew stronger each day. She had noticed small, unusual signs that did not fit the ordinary image she had of him. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, she would see a sharpness in his eyes, a careful observation of everything around him. He seemed aware of details that others missed, and he handled situations with a wisdom that felt far beyond his years. The more she noticed, the more her curiosity grew. But she still could not imagine what his past might have been like, or why people treated him with such respect. One evening, while she was preparing dinner, a visitor came to the door. The visitor greeted her husband with a deep respect that made her pause. They spoke quietly. She overheard a conversation about business matters and responsibilities that she could not fully understand. The visitor left after a short while, but the impression lingered. Her husband seemed ordinary in appearance, but the way people spoke to him suggested a life full of accomplishments and influence. The girl felt a mixture of awe, confusion, and a growing sense of mystery surrounding him. She began to notice other small signs. The house, though modest, was perfectly maintained. Everything had its place. Bills were always in order, and occasional deliveries arrived that suggested hidden wealth or connections. She realized that while he lived simply, there was a complexity to his life that she could not yet see. Her husband remained quiet about these matters, but his calm demeanor and subtle hints suggested that she would understand in time. This realization both excited and worried her. She had entered the marriage thinking it was a punishment, but now she sensed that life might have more in store for her than she had ever imagined. As the days went by, she began to learn more about the small acts of care her husband performed daily. He never demanded attention, never insisted on being waited on, but he noticed details that most people would overlook. He would quietly adjust something she had missed, leave a small note of encouragement, or offer a smile when she felt tired or discouraged. These gestures, though subtle, began to change the way she felt about their life together. The fear and resentment she had felt at the beginning slowly transformed into respect and a cautious trust. One morning, she found herself in the garden, tending to a small collection of plants. Her husband joined her, and they worked together in silence. He showed her how to prune certain plants, how to water them carefully, and how to nurture them so they could thrive. She realized that his patience and careful observation extended beyond people and daily tasks. It applied to every aspect of life. This realization gave her hope that perhaps she could learn from him, grow alongside him, and find a way to build her own strength. Their conversations began to grow deeper, though still cautious and gentle. He spoke of ideas, of life, of patience, and of understanding people. She listened intently, absorbing his words and trying to apply them to her own life. She began to understand that strength was not just about physical ability, but about character, thoughtfulness, and integrity. The girl had lived a life of hardship, but now she saw a different kind of strength in the man beside her, one that was quiet, steady, and powerful in its own way. despite the growing understanding between them. The mystery of his past continued to intrigue her. She noticed that he would sometimes receive messages, phone calls, or visitors that seemed important, yet he never discussed them. She resisted the urge to pry, understanding that some things were private, but her curiosity was a constant presence. She wondered who he had been before, what life he had lived, and why he had chosen to live quietly despite apparent wealth and influence. This curiosity became a subtle motivation for her, a reason to observe, learn, and grow alongside him. Life also presented small challenges that brought them closer together. One day, a delivery arrived that required her husband's attention, and she assisted him in handling it. They worked as a team, coordinating and communicating silently, and she realized how much she had learned about trust and cooperation. The small victories in daily life, like managing responsibilities together or handling unexpected events calmly, strengthened their bond. She began to feel that she was not alone in the world, that someone truly saw and valued her efforts. Her husband continued to reveal his character in subtle ways. He was always considerate of her feelings, never belittled her, and never assumed that she would understand everything immediately. He offered guidance gently, with patience and encouragement, rather than criticism. These small acts of understanding began to heal some of the invisible wounds she carried from her childhood and the cruelty of her stepmother. She began to trust him not only as a husband, but as a person whose values she could admire and learn from. Over time, she noticed that he had a wide network of contacts who respected and admired him. People who came to see him always treated him with care and consideration. She realized that his disability had not defined his life or his achievements. It was only one part of his story. Slowly, the girl began to understand that appearances could be deceiving, that the world was more complex than she had thought, and that people often carried histories and strengths hidden from plain view. One evening, she asked him gently about his past. He smiled softly and explained that everyone had a story and that some stories revealed themselves only when the time was right. He told her that life was not always easy, that people often judged too quickly, that understanding required patience and openness. She listened, absorbing his words, feeling a deep sense of respect and trust growing between them. She realized that the man she had feared and pitied was someone extraordinary, someone whose wisdom and patience would guide her through life in ways she had never imagined. As the days passed, the girl grew more confident in herself. She began to take small steps toward independence, learning new skills, managing responsibilities, and finding her own voice in subtle ways. The small acts of respect, kindness, and patience from her husband provided a foundation for her growth. She realized that even in a life she had thought was ruined, there was potential for learning, growth, and happiness. She also began to notice the emotional depth of her husband. Though he spoke little about feelings, his actions conveyed empathy, understanding, and care. He noticed when she was tired, encouraged her when she was uncertain, and provided quiet support when she needed it most. These small acts of kindness became a lifeline for her, helping her navigate the challenges of her new life and the memories of past hardships. One day, she discovered a small hidden compartment in the study. Inside were documents, awards, and photographs that revealed a past full of accomplishments. She was astonished to see the life her husband had led, the recognition he had received, and the respect he commanded. For the first time, she realized that the man she had married was far more than she had ever imagined. She felt awe, respect, and a growing sense of curiosity about the choices he had made and the life he had lived. Despite the revelation, she wanted to understand slowly, to observe, and to learn. She realized that patience and understanding were key, just as he had taught her through his actions and guidance. She began to see that their relationship was not defined by fear, obligation, or pity, but by respect, trust, and shared growth. The girl began to appreciate the small moments of life more deeply. A quiet morning, a simple meal, a gentle smile from her husband, all became treasures she valued deeply. She realized that happiness was not always found in wealth or freedom, but in respect, understanding, and the subtle acts of kindness that shaped daily life. Her bond with her husband grew steadily. They worked together, learned together, and faced small challenges side by side. She realized that her initial fears and resentment had transformed into a quiet admiration and trust. Life, which she had once thought was ruined, now held the promise of discovery, learning, and meaningful connection. In this stage of her journey, she understood that people were often more than what they appeared to be. Her husband's calm demeanor, intelligence, and patience were only part of the story. His strength lay in his character, his values, and the quiet ways he influenced the world around him. She began to see that her life, though shaped by hardship, could also be shaped by these lessons, by trust, and by the shared growth that comes from understanding and respect. By the end of this part of her journey, the girl had grown emotionally and mentally. She had learned to observe, to trust, and to appreciate the subtle moments that made life meaningful. She had begun to understand the remarkable man she lived with and the quiet strength he brought into her life. Though much remained unknown, she felt a sense of hope, curiosity, and resilience that prepared her for the revelations and changes that were yet to come. Life had settled into a quiet rhythm, but the girl still felt the pull of curiosity and wonder about the man she had married. Every day, she observed the subtle ways he moved through life, how people reacted to him, and the quiet authority he seemed to command. Though she had begun to trust and respect him, there was a part of her that still longed to understand his past and the full story of who he really was. She did not know that soon. The truth would come in a way she could never have imagined. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the house addressed to her husband in a very formal and urgent manner. He opened it carefully and read the contents, his face calm but with a flicker of something serious in his eyes. The girl noticed immediately that this letter was different from the usual correspondence. She asked quietly about it, but he only smiled and said, "Some matters must be handled carefully, and some truths are revealed at the right time." She respected his words but felt a rising tension, a sense that something important was about to happen. A few days later, there was a small gathering at their home. Unexpected visitors who seemed important and spoke in hushed, respectful tones. The girl noticed the way her husband interacted with them, his calm, quiet authority, his sharp mind, and his ability to command respect without raising his voice. She was both amazed and confused. How could a man who appeared so ordinary be treated with such reverence? She could feel the weight of the secret he carried, though she did not yet know what it was. Then came the day that changed everything. There was an emergency in the neighborhood, a minor accident that required quick decision-making and some resources that were beyond ordinary means. She watched as her husband acted calmly, efficiently, and decisively. He gave instructions, coordinated people, and managed the situation with ease. She began to see that his abilities extended far beyond what she had imagined. People followed his lead without question, trusting his judgment completely. Her admiration grew, but so did the sense of mystery. Later that evening, he spoke to her privately. He explained that there was more to his life than she had seen, that his disability had been a way to live quietly and observe the world without. The constant attention that his real position in society would attract. He revealed that he was, in fact, a billionaire who had chosen to live simply to test the character of those around him, and to live a life away from unnecessary judgments. She was stunned. The man she had believed to be dependent, quiet, and ordinary was actually extraordinarily accomplished and wealthy. She could hardly believe it. The girl felt a rush of emotions: shock, disbelief, awe, and a strange relief. The life she had thought was ruined had, in fact, placed her in the presence of someone remarkable. She felt a deep respect and a growing sense of gratitude for the way he had treated her, for his patience, and for the lessons she had learned in the time they had been together. She realized that his quiet kindness had never been ordinary. It was the reflection of a man who understood the value of human character above all else. In the following days, their life began to change in subtle ways. Though the man remained calm and composed, the girl noticed that she was now treated with even greater respect, not just as his wife, but as someone he trusted and valued. He shared more about his life, his work, and the responsibilities he had managed, though always in small, measured doses. She absorbed every word, fascinated by the depth of his experience and the quiet strength of his character. The revelation of his true identity changed her perception of the world and of her own life. She began to understand that wealth and status were not the most important aspects of his life. What mattered most was his integrity, patience, and the way he treated others. He explained that he had chosen to live in disguise, to see who valued people for their character rather than their status, and to find someone who could share a life built on trust, respect, and understanding. The girl felt a profound sense of validation, realizing that she had been chosen not because of wealth or beauty, but because of her resilience, kindness, and willingness to endure hardship with dignity. As she reflected on her past, the girl realized how much she had grown. The cruelty of her stepmother, the forced marriage, and the challenges she had endured had shaped her, teaching her patience, resilience, and strength. But now, with the truth revealed, she saw that her hardships had also led her to a life filled with unexpected lessons, guidance, and opportunities. She felt a deep gratitude for the man who had shown her kindness, respect, and the chance to discover her own inner strength in the days that followed. She noticed subtle changes in her interactions with the world. She carried herself with more confidence, spoke with greater assurance, and began to take small steps toward independence. She understood that her life was no longer defined by the cruelty she had endured or the circumstances of her past. She could make choices, learn, grow, and build a future that reflected her values and aspirations. The man beside her became both a guide and a partner in this journey. Their relationship deepened as they shared more of their lives and experiences. He continued to show patience, understanding, and quiet support, allowing her to grow at her own pace. She learned to communicate openly, to trust her instincts, and to appreciate the subtle wisdom in his guidance. The revelation of his billionaire identity did not change the essence of their bond. It strengthened it, providing context for the respect, kindness, and patience he had always shown. She also began to see how the world around them responded differently once his true identity was known. Visitors treated him with even greater respect, and she noticed how they now looked at her with curiosity and admiration. Yet, she understood that these reactions were superficial compared to the profound lessons she had learned. Her focus remained on the values, patience, integrity that had guided her husband and shaped her own growth. One day, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a life of fear, abuse, and forced circumstances, she had come to a place of understanding, trust, and growth. She realized that her life, though filled with hardship, had been a preparation for the lessons she was now learning. She had gained resilience, patience, and the ability to observe and understand people deeply. The revelation of her husband's true identity was not just a moment of surprise. It was a moment of clarity that illuminated the entire path she had walked. The girl also began to appreciate the importance of humility and discretion. Her husband had not revealed his true identity immediately. He had allowed her to see the world through her own eyes, to observe character and values without the influence of wealth or status. This approach taught her the importance of understanding people for who they were rather than what they appeared to be. She began to apply this lesson in her own interactions, showing kindness, patience, and respect to others in ways she had never considered before, as she continued to adapt to this new reality. The girl felt a profound sense of gratitude. She was grateful for the kindness and patience of her husband, for the lessons she had learned through hardship, and for the opportunity to grow and discover her own strength. She understood that life's challenges, though painful, had led her to a place of wisdom, trust, and understanding. The revelation of her husband's billionaire status was not the end of her journey. It was a pivotal moment that provided clarity and purpose in the weeks that followed. She began to take more initiative in her daily life. She managed household responsibilities with greater confidence, took time for personal growth, and began to explore her own interests and aspirations. She realized that she could balance the lessons she had learned from hardship with the guidance and support of her husband, creating a life that was both meaningful and fulfilling. The quiet moments of kindness, respect. The understanding that had always existed in their home became the foundation for a stronger, more confident version of herself. The girl also began to notice subtle changes in her perception of the world. She realized that true strength was not measured by physical ability, wealth, or status, but by character, patience, and integrity. She had witnessed these qualities in her husband from the beginning. The revelation of his true identity only deepened her respect and admiration. She understood that the lessons she had learned were invaluable, shaping her into a person capable of resilience, empathy, and thoughtful action. By the end of this part of her journey, the girl had experienced a profound transformation. She had moved from fear and resentment to understanding and respect, from uncertainty to confidence, and from a sense of helplessness to a recognition of her own strength. The revelation of her husband's true identity had not just been a surprise, it had been a catalyst for growth, learning, and self-discovery. She now saw her life not as ruined, but as a journey filled with lessons, guidance, and the potential for a future shaped by understanding, trust, and shared growth. Life had changed completely for the girl. But it was not the kind of change she had expected when her stepmother forced her into marriage. It was a change filled with understanding, growth, and a slow awakening to the truth of the man she had married. She had learned to see beyond appearances, to value kindness, patience, and character, and to trust in the quiet strength of the person beside her. Now, with the truth revealed, her life was entering a new chapter, one that promised hope, opportunity, and a chance to shape her own destiny. The girl had grown in confidence and understanding. She had learned to manage the household, handle responsibilities, and even make decisions that affected their daily life. Her husband continued to guide her with patience, never pushing or demanding, but offering quiet advice and support whenever she needed it. She realized that the relationship they shared was built on respect, trust, and shared growth, rather than control or dependence. This realization gave her a deep sense of peace she had never known. As she settled into this new rhythm, she began to think about her past, the cruel words and actions of her stepmother, the forced marriage, and the hardships she had endured. But instead of resentment, she felt a sense of understanding. Those experiences had shaped her, taught her resilience, and prepared her to face life with strength and dignity. She realized that her journey had been necessary, even if painful, to bring her to this point of awareness and growth. With her husband's guidance, she began exploring opportunities to learn new skills and discover her own interests. She took small steps toward personal development, reading, practicing new crafts, and understanding the world around her in ways she had never imagined. Each day brought new lessons and small achievements. She began to feel a sense of accomplishment and self-worth that had been missing from her life for so long. The quiet support and encouragement from her husband made her feel safe and empowered. Their relationship deepened as they spent time together in meaningful ways. They shared ideas, reflected on life, and supported each other in facing challenges. She realized that love and respect were not about grand gestures or wealth, but about understanding, patience, and shared experiences. She appreciated the quiet moments, a smile, a shared meal, a gentle conversation, as the true treasures of life. These moments taught her the value of connection and the importance of nurturing relationships with care and attention. The revelation of her husband's billionaire status had changed their lives in practical ways as well. They were no longer limited by financial concerns. She had access to resources that allowed her to explore new possibilities. But she understood that wealth alone did not define happiness or fulfillment. What mattered most was the integrity, patience, and character that had guided their life together. She learned to navigate the new world around her with humility, grace, and awareness. Always remembering the lessons she had learned through hardship, her stepmother's presence in her memory became less painful over time. She no longer carried resentment, but she did reflect on the cruelty she had endured. She realized that the hardships had strengthened her, taught her resilience, and given her the ability to appreciate kindness and understanding when it appeared. She also realized that she had the power to define her own life, to make choices, and to build a future based on her values rather than the limitations imposed on her by others. The girl also began to understand the responsibility that came with her new life. She saw how her husband had used his resources and influence with care, integrity, and wisdom. She learned that true strength and power were not about control or domination, but about understanding, compassion, and the ability to make a positive impact. This lesson inspired her to think about the ways she could contribute, help others, and use her own growing abilities to make a difference. As days turned into weeks, the girl found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the fear, uncertainty, and loneliness of her early days with her husband. She remembered the small acts of kindness that had given her hope, the patience and understanding that had nurtured her growth, and the revelation of his true identity that had transformed her perception of life. Each memory was a thread in the tapestry of her journey, and she realized how much she had learned, grown, and changed. She began to take small steps toward building her own confidence and independence. She explored hobbies and interests she had never considered before, practiced new skills, and engaged with the world around her in ways that were meaningful and fulfilling. Her husband remained a supportive presence, offering guidance without control, encouraging her curiosity, and celebrating her achievements. She felt a growing sense of purpose and empowerment, knowing that she could shape her own life. While continuing to grow alongside him, the girl also noticed changes in the way others perceived her. Neighbors, friends, and visitors now treated her with respect and admiration, recognizing her growth, resilience, and dignity. She understood that her journey had shaped her into a person of strength and character. She carried herself with confidence and grace. These external changes reflected the internal transformation she had experienced, reinforcing the lessons she had learned about patience, resilience, and the importance of character. In the quiet moments, she reflected on the lessons of her life. She realized that hardship had taught her resilience, patience, and the value of kindness. She understood that true happiness came not from wealth, status, or convenience, but from meaningful connections, trust, and shared growth. She appreciated the quiet moments with her husband, the lessons she had learned through observation, and the opportunities she now had to grow, explore, and contribute to the world around her. The girl also began to embrace the idea of giving back. Inspired by the way her husband had lived his life with integrity and care, she thought about ways she could support others, share her experiences, and help those in need. She understood that her journey, though difficult, had given her insight, empathy, and the ability to make a positive difference in the lives of others. She began to see herself not just as someone who had endured hardship, but as someone who could use her experiences to help, inspire, and support others. As she continued to grow, she discovered a deep sense of partnership with her husband. They shared responsibilities, ideas, and experiences, learning from each other and supporting each other's growth. She realized that their relationship was built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared values. The love that had slowly grown between them was not based on obligation or pity, but on admiration, trust, and the recognition of each other's character. In the final stages of her journey, she reflected on the transformation she had experienced. From a life filled with fear, cruelty, and uncertainty, she had moved to a life of understanding, growth, and hope. She had learned patience, resilience, and the value of kindness and respect. She had discovered the remarkable nature of the man she had married and had grown to admire, trust, and love him deeply. Her life, once thought ruined, had been rewritten into a story of strength, learning, and shared growth. The girl realized that her journey was not only about discovering her husband's secret, but also about discovering herself. She had learned to trust her instincts, value her own abilities, and appreciate the lessons that life had offered, even through hardship. She understood that happiness, growth, and fulfillment were built through patience, resilience, and meaningful connections, rather than through wealth or external appearances. By the end of this part, she felt a deep sense of peace and empowerment. Her life was no longer defined by fear, cruelty, or forced circumstances, but by understanding, respect, and the opportunity to shape her own future. She had learned that life, even when it seems unfair, can lead to growth, discovery, and the chance to build a meaningful, fulfilling existence. The quiet strength, kindness, and wisdom of her husband had guided her. But it was her own resilience, patience, and courage that had allowed her to embrace this new life fully. In the end, the girl looked back on her journey with a sense of gratitude and accomplishment. She had moved from a life of fear and helplessness to one of understanding, confidence, and hope. She had learned to see beyond appearances, to value kindness and patience, and to trust in the quiet strength of character. Her life, once thought ruined, had been transformed into a story of growth, love, and shared discovery. And with this realization, she embraced her future, ready to continue her journey with wisdom, courage, and a heart open to the possibilities that lay ahead.